It's been a long time since I've reviewed a good budget mini MIDI keyboard, and I think what I'm going to do now is go on Amazon and look for some of the cheapest ones, some of the ones that I maybe might have missed, and some of the ones that you suggest to me in the comments of my videos. And we're going to review some more budget mini MIDI keyboards. And today, specifically, we're looking at the Alesis VMini. Super compact mini MIDI keyboard by Alesis. I've seen a few other content creators, beat makers using this, and I'm curious to try it out. It's a little bit older, but this thing is 80 bucks at the time of recording this video on Amazon. So very good for those of you on a budget. Without further ado, let's do some unboxing and check it out. Today's video is going to be sponsored by Skillshare, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is TAETRO, your electronic music mentor. All right, we love simple packaging with nothing but the keyboard inside. Oh, and some documentation, of course, and a USB cable. This thing is so tiny and compact. Wow. Very nice. It's got that new MIDI keyboard smell. You know what I'm talking about? Now, this keyboard comes with a couple pieces of software. On the box, it advertises a limited version of Pro Tools as well as some sounds from Alesis. I gotta register it to see what those are all about. But let's take a look at the hardware first. Okay, so one of the ways they reduced the size of this controller pretty significantly is by giving it only 4 pads and only 4 knobs and a couple function buttons here on the side. On a lot of controllers, you see 2 rows of pads or 2 rows of knobs, which would of course extend the height of the controller. Let's look at this for thickness here. It is actually pretty thick, I would say. It's not as thin as I would expect a small controller like this to be. Although this is pretty old, like I said, like this came out some time ago. It's not the newest, hottest controller, but I do like this form factor. I like the fact that it's not as tall, though we do sacrifice some features, but the thickness gives it a robust quality. It is plastic, but it feels like a solid plastic, not a flimsy plastic, if that means anything to you. The keys feel pretty good, though they do feel like that old style key where there's actually like a piece of plastic inside the keyboard that sort of bends as you press the note. It creates a certain level of resistance that feels good on the hands, but also feels like it might not last for years and decades. Once we plug it in, we'll test the sensitivity of the pads. These are regular old knobs. These are not endless encoders, meaning that you turn it all the way to the left, it has a stopping point. You turn it all the way to the right, it has a stopping point. They don't infinitely spin. This plays a role in how it interfaces with software, of course, because we'll have to change like how the knobs react to our virtual instruments and virtual sound so that they're not just jumping around and changing parameters like that. Looks like instead of a pitch and mod strip or wheel, we get these buttons, which I'm curious to see how it works. A sustain button, are also curious to see how that works, and octave up and down as we would expect. USB-B port on the side, I approve. No little mini USB or micro, I forget which one is a pain. But hey, if it's not USB-C or if it's not this USB-B type cable, then get out of here. This is what I want, either this or USB-C. Though I do wish it was, I feel like it's more convenient for it to be on the back, although it is hard to push up against your laptop like that. I don't know. Let me know your preferences on where to put the USB cable. Well, why don't we go ahead, plug it in, take it for a spin. So like every piece of gear I have comes with a USB cable. I just have so many, but how many USB cables do you need to use at one time? My solution to this, and you let me know if I'm crazy or not in the comments, is companies should only include USB cables in odd years or even years, take your pick. Every other year, gear will come with a USB cable. Every other year, it will not. I feel like that will save on waste. And how many people just don't have one of these USB cables already? Tell me if I'm crazy. Oh, I really love these backlit knobs. Hopefully you can see that on camera well enough, but these are indeed backlit, and our pads, and no, maybe these are not backlit, but octave up and down, and at least the pads and knobs are backlit. Very cool. Let me make sure you can see that. Check it out. It's a nice look, right? Like I said at the top, it does come with some bundled software. I am by no means going to use that limited version of Pro Tools that they included, though if it's your only option and it comes free with the controller, you can't really go wrong. I'm an Ableton user, but a MIDI controller like this is pretty DAW agnostic. So whether or not you use Pro Tools or Logic or FL Studio, this controller will likely work with your DAW as long as it accepts USB MIDI. And it has no added benefits really to other DAWs. There's no functionality that I can see on the surface of this controller that would give it the edge for a particular DAW. It's got pads, knobs, and keys. You're either playing instruments in your DAW or you're tweaking parameters, and all DAWs do both of those things. So before you write that comment, is it good for FL Studio? Yes. Is it good for Logic? Yes. Is it good for Ableton? Yes. Please don't ask me. All right, so I went ahead and registered the Alesis VMini on the website, and there were a few software downloads, a lot of which I had never heard of, and there's some discounts for things. The one notable thing is it gives you 60 free lessons with Melodics, which is a really great learning tool if you're learning how to finger drum. So that was probably the best thing that I saw in the list. And it also came with a plugin called Expand 2. Expand, no E, exclamation point 2. Little bit of a retro design here. I don't know if you would call this retro, this kind of green tech kind of thing. It reminds me of the Pip-Boy in Fallout a little bit, if you're not familiar. And it comes with a lot of sounds. So opening up this window here, you see each category has lots and lots of sounds in it. And, you know, not just synth sounds, but it's also got some drums and percussion sounds. Let's load up a couple of these sounds so you can hear what they sound like. I'm a sucker for synth pads. Let's maybe check out a synth pad sound. Huge pads, the bigger story. So far, these sounds are not terrible, you know? I think that the visual aesthetic is showing the age of the software and of the controller, but also the selection of sounds is probably showing the age as well. As I've scanned through some of these, they're not some of the trendiest sounds, not some of the sounds you're going to be hearing in a lot of big productions of, you know, current music. But some are also perfectly fine. I'm sure there are some usable sounds within here. And like I mentioned, there's also some drum sounds. And this actually gives us a chance to try out some of these pads. I would say for how old this controller is, the pad sensitivity is pretty good. What I usually look for in controllers like this is how does it do at a very low velocity, a very soft hit. And there is a level there that I can't detect. I'm not actually applying pressure with these basic hits, but the threshold is not bad at all. Yeah, I could definitely work with these pads for sure. There's only 4 of them though, obviously, as you can see. So that will definitely affect how you play them and what is actually available to you. When you think about it, if you have kick, snare, and maybe a couple hi-hats or percussion, you can get away with it. But what is also interesting is that there's no bank button. So I'm curious to see if the octave button also affects the pads. Let me load up a normal drum rack here within Ableton Live, which is my DAW of choice. So I've loaded up this drum rack. Let me throw a couple quick samples in here. Oh, maybe I'll grab from my own sample pack. Here we go. Sure, lo-fi sample pack. Let me just grab a hi-hat, a kick, and a snare. Boom, put that right there. And that's a good kick. And let's arm the track. Here we go. Interesting. So the first thing I notice here is these pads are mapped strangely. So generally the pads are mapped chromatically on most MIDI controllers from C1, which is the note that this sends, and then it would be C sharp, followed by D, followed by D sharp. However, this one appears to skip some pads, which is unfortunate, because then that means it's not going to line up with your typical drum kit arrangement that most DAWs and most drum machines use. So I could work around this for sure, but I would just have to place these samples on the appropriate pads. And, you know, that's fine, but that's not the most optimized version. What I wanted to say is, like, how do I switch banks? Am I limited to just those 4? It appears that way. Is there something that I'm missing? No button that I can see. I'll note that the packaging also said something about an editor, which I looked for in my downloads, and I even followed the URL, but I got a 404 error when trying to look for that editor. So don't know what's up with that. This is a huge drawback of this controller. A, the fact that these pads are not lined up to a typical drum rack, and that's not just for Ableton users. I assume that spills over into other DAWs because a lot of common sound kits are arranged in this chromatic way. And it would be one thing if I could switch from playing 4 samples to another 4 samples or another bank of samples, but I don't see any way to do that. Unfortunate. Let me talk about key quality for a moment. I did mention earlier that I could tell these were sort of an old style construction of keys that we don't really see a lot in more modern MIDI controllers, and it definitely feels different and not in such a great way. It literally feels like you're bending plastic on the inside of the controller, which is, I'm pretty sure, is what's happening. So it just feels like a little unnatural bit of resistance. That said, it's definitely playable. And I don't have any problem with sensitivity. As soon as I get there, I am getting a signal. So it's not an issue of not getting a signal. It really is just an issue of feel. And if you play a controller like this versus a newer MIDI controller, you will definitely be able to tell the difference, and you will definitely not want to go back. It feels like I have to push harder, even though I really don't. It feels like it actually takes more pressure to play notes on one of these controllers, if that makes sense. Let me just lay down a quick drum beat really quick. And, you know, we can try to mess with these knobs a bit. Knobs is really hard to screw up, but let's just make sure that they work as we would expect. I'll throw my master beat repeat here on this drum rack, and I will MIDI map this controller by going into Live, Preferences, MIDI. We'll find it as control surface. Hopefully it is a control surface in Live. If not, we'll just go to None. Alesis V, and then we'll find, see, there's even an editor out here, which is quite strange. Hopefully that gives us enough of what we need. And let's turn remote on, which should give us the ability to map. Perfect, it does. Let's map all 4 of these knobs to the beat repeat parameters. I've got a tutorial on how to set up these beat repeats for yourself as well. Definitely check that out. So let's see, turn all these down to a 0, run the beat. Now, some knobs have a bit of a very easy throw, meaning they're very sensitive. As soon as you touch them, they start moving. These have a slight resistance, which is not a bad thing. I think it allows you to be a little bit more accurate. It does have them travel a little bit slower, or you have to put a little bit more speed into it, but Nothing bad about these knobs. The knobs are so far the best thing about the controller, I would say. Let's check out the pitch bend and mod action. They're on buttons. I have no idea. Oh. That's interesting. So you push the button once and it bends the note down. Assume it works. It goes up a fourth. That's interesting. Maybe that would be cool for performance. Yeah, I could see myself having fun with that. That's an interesting approach, having it on a button. It saves space, but I think a wheel or a strip would be ideal. Sustain. I don't get it. I'm pushing. Oh, so sustain toggles on and off, it seems. Just to show you what that would be like with that sustain turned off. As opposed to... I think this is a neat function to have on a keyboard like this, because there's no sustain port. It's not a perfect solution, but it is a solution. And I like the toggling of a mod switch too. I don't mind that, actually. You know, the button pushes for the pitch bend and the mod are kind of growing on me. With a touch strip or a wheel, you have to be like accurate with where you're pressing or where you're moving the wheel or where you're moving the strip. With these, you push it and it does one thing. So I think there's something to that. You don't have to worry about your accuracy. Okay, so what I want to do is take a quick look at comparing this to some other MIDI keyboards in the space and help you decide whether or not you should pick this one up or maybe spend a little bit more money on another keyboard. But regardless of whatever MIDI controller you end up buying, you will need to know how to play music. You'll need to know a little bit about music theory. You'll need to know about whatever program you decide to use. And you can do all that with our sponsor for today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions take the next step in their creative journey. They have thousands of inspiring classes where you can learn music production, photography, video making, and more. Skillshare Premium is super affordable at under $10 a month, but today, for the first 1,000 of my subscribers to use the link in the description, you can get yourself a free trial of a Skillshare Premium membership. With Skillshare Premium, you get access to all of the classes on Skillshare. Regardless of the MIDI controller you end up choosing, you're going to have to learn how to play music, and knowing a little bit about music theory would be really helpful. But music theory can be a little bit boring, but they've got a music theory class taught by an Ableton certified trainer taught within Ableton Live. So it makes sense for producers like us. I also have to recommend Young Guru's Learn to Mix Your Music class, especially if you're making your own music from home. Mixing can be a bit of a challenge, but Young Guru's class actually taught me a lot about mixing my own music and has helped me get my sound to a more professional level. So use the link in the description. The first 1,000 people to click that will get the free trial of the Skillshare Premium membership. Take advantage, get yourself something for free, support the channel, and support the sponsor. But let's get back into comparing the Alesis VMini to some other mini MIDI keyboards. So what the Alesis VMini has going for it is its size for portability, its build quality, and its price. This is a extreme budget mini MIDI keyboard at $80. But there are some other contenders in the space, with the Alesis VMini being a relatively old MIDI controller that you might consider spending a little bit more money on and get a bit more functionality. And if you know my channel, you probably know the keyboards that I'm going to bring up. You have the Arturia Mini Lab. Unrivaled in key quality in terms of mini MIDI keyboard controllers. You have endless encoders that didn't work so well on release, but a recent firmware update greatly improved and now they work great. You also have 8 pads, which are not the best pads. This might be the weakest part of the controller. However, they function as session clips in Ableton Live if that's something that you're into. Not to mention, Arturia makes some of the best plugins and sounds, and it comes bundled with some of those sounds. But you will definitely lose the portability factor, whereas you can see that the Alesis VMini is probably close to half the size of the Arturia Mini Lab. Though the Mini Lab is pretty old itself, I have no insider knowledge, but I would expect to see a Mark III version of this keyboard sometime in the future. It has been a while for the Mini Lab. A quick search shows that the Mini Lab is going for about $109 currently, so $29 more expensive than the Alesis VMini. Next up, I've got the Novation Launch Key, one of my favorites. This is really great for Ableton users. It has a lot of very specific Ableton functionality built into it, which is why it's one of my favorites. It's also got some things the Alesis VMini does not have, like sustain port and MIDI out. Sustain port has become pretty standard on mini MIDI keyboards, which the Alesis VMini does not have, unfortunately. 2 rows of pads, and they are RGB pads, some transport functionality for Ableton Live, an arpeggiator, 8 knobs, pitch and mod. In terms of portability, this is a bit lighter than the Alesis VMini, but you can see the size difference there. I would say it's a negligible difference in terms of both of these can fit in your backpack. This is a fairly newer keyboard, and I'm seeing it out there for $109 as well, same price as you can get a Mini Lab for. So again, $29 more than the Alesis VMini. Worth mentioning that it comes with a limited version of Ableton Live, which is my favorite DAW. If you're looking for a DAW, you don't know what DAW to use, you should do some searching around, check out your favorite producers, see what they use, and dive into that software. When it comes to sounds and software, I mentioned the Arturia keyboard. Arturia is great. They have the V collection, which is an awesome selection of synths and sounds. Which is why I also want to bring up this competitor here. This is the Complete M32 by Native Instruments. Now, Native Instruments is also one of those leaders in software and sounds. So whereas it doesn't have pads, it does have added functionality. It will work in most DAWs. It works in Ableton Live, transport control, recording, etc. But it also functions very well with Native Instruments plugins. So if you're into that, you like the sounds that Native Instruments makes, the functionality built right into this M32 keyboard are worth your while. And I will say the Native Instruments sounds, as well as the Arturia sounds, are miles better than the sounds you're getting with the Alesis VMini. But of course, this is a 32 key keyboard. It is a bit longer and a bit taller. So there you go on the size difference. It's a little harder to carry around a 32 key keyboard if you're traveling or if you have to be mobile, but you do get that expanded range for playing. Last but not least, one of the most popular mini MIDI keyboards. Fairly new to the market, you have the Akai MPK Mini Mark III. Now I'm seeing this for around $120, so it's about $10 more expensive than the other competitors and about $39 more expensive than the Alesis VMini. But for what you get out of the Akai MPK Mini and all these other keyboards, I would say spending a little bit more money to get a bit more quality and a bit more functionality is probably worth it, right? So right off the bat, you get 8 pads, and they do assign correctly to typical drum racks. You get 8 endless encoders, so as opposed to these knobs that have start and end points, these are endless. They'll keep spinning. There are different control templates to help it function better in different DAWs and workflows. We've got a sustain port on the back. You can tell that it's almost the same thickness, but of course the footprint is going to be different. The Akai MPK Mini's footprint is a bit bigger. But same with some of these other controllers, kind of a negligible difference when comparing it to, say, the Launch Key Mini versus Alesis VMini versus Akai MPK Mini. All of those 3 can very easily fit into a bag. Joystick for pitch and mod, which is not my favorite. I think the ranking is definitely pitch and mod wheels, touch strips, buttons, joystick. I think joystick is at the bottom of that list, but I digress. Akai also has their own free music making software, MPC Beats, which I'm not a huge fan of the workflow in, but it is a free piece of music making software. It's not just a collection of sounds like what comes with the Alesis VMini. Another value add. All right, so what did you think of the Alesis VMini? Let me know in a comment down below. I was a little bit excited to try out this form factor, it being a bit slimmer than most other mini MIDI controllers, height-wise, I should say. But I was really disappointed. I can't believe how far keys have come. It's been a while since I've played a keyboard with this old-style keybed, and it does feel really different. I was also pretty disappointed by the pads in the way they were arranged, in the way I couldn't download the editor, and the way there's no pad bank button. But if you're a VMini Pro user, please let me know in the comments, what am I missing? However, I think that if there's a keyboard like this that you have to take so many extra steps just to get to function properly, it's probably worth spending a little bit of extra money to go with one of the competitors that I just outlined. So the price is pretty low, but you get what you pay for is kind of my takeaway from this. But let me know if you think differently in the comments down below. I'm going to be making some beats with this anyway. I'll make at least one beat video, so make sure you're following me on Instagram and Twitter and all that, and I'll share that. At the end of the day, it's MIDI controllers. They control the software, so you can still make epic music on it despite its limitations and despite its drawbacks. Don't forget to check out the sponsor link in the description down below. Take advantage of the Skillshare for your premium membership, and subscribe to the channel for more live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer. I want to do more budget keyboards, so spam the comments with the next budget keyboard you want me to check out. Something cheap. Let's do it. All right, that's going to be it. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.